first thing I should point out is it's not a full closure of the ward. It is a suspension, a temporary suspension for 12 to 18 months. The reason being, let's be honest, what we're offering at the moment in terms of a private patient's offering isn't up to scratch. It isn't what people would expect, and one of the biggest complaints I get is from people who have been private patients who say they're not getting what they're paying for, and from businesses who say that other jurisdictions do things differently and better than us. I think this is a huge opportunity to be able to create a completely new offering for private patients, a chance to properly brand it. At the moment, the private patients ward is seen as just another part of Noble's Hospital. So this is an opportunity to separate it out and create a world-class offering that puts the patient first.
You said it was a temporary suspension of the unit, but that has been also described as at least a year. So what's happening? There's been a number of concerns raised about a few things, obviously. What's happening with things like beds, where we're coming up to a pretty busy period for Nobles, and there's often overspill into this area for beds?
Well, one of the things that we need to get better at is bed management in that sense. You've hit exactly the nail on the head, actually, as to why some of this work needs to be undertaken, because the private patients ward isn't a private patients ward. It's being used by Noble's Hospital on occasions. The suspension isn't going to take effect until January. There's 3 months lead-in time, which will allow for things to be done, particularly around bed management and also the isolation patients, which sometimes use the wards on the private patients. That will give the management team ample time to get things in place. But equally, in terms of it being a temporary suspension for a year to 18 months, we've got to do this properly. We could tinker around the edges and try and just refurbish the unit while people are still going in and out of it. But to me, that's not delivering a proper service. What we need to do is look at the whole holistic approach. We need to create a private patients unit that is completely separate from the main hospital, that has its own branding and logo. We need to create more transparency around the costs involved, and also the way that we invoice patients, and also what patient expectations should be.
So just to go back to those beds then, for a time there will be how many beds not being able to be used, whether correctly or incorrectly?
Well, it's hard to say, because subjectively, of course, people only use the private patients for NHS as and when required. So it's not a set period. So it's not like a ward closure where you can say there's 21 beds in a ward and that would be the loss, because the private patients is only used as overspill. So it differs from day to day depending on what statistic you look at, and sometimes it's not used at all. It is purely for private patients. But the point is, and again, I just want to emphasise the point because you have hit it head on that, it's not a private patients ward at the moment, because it is being used for NHS overspill. And the people who are going, and sometimes it's even being used for sort of quarantine purposes for patients. So private patients are paying to be in the ward that potentially has some of the sickest patients. Bit of a strange one, that.
There was a meeting with Prospect and Unite unions on Friday. We've heard the concerns that many questions went unanswered, mainly because yourself, your chief executive, nor the hospital manager were there. Can you tell us why you weren't there, and are you planning to speak to them directly?
As minister, I could quite easily have rocked up to the meeting and given a load of platitudes. Personally, I think the best option was to have the officers there who will be dealing with this day in, day out, who will be the first point of contact for the unions and for the staff, and had more chance of being able to answer the questions on the ground. There were questions
I think it would be argued, though, that a lot of those questions weren't able to be answered because they were more in human resources roles.
Well, the feedback I've had is that the vast majority of questions around the private patient closure were answered, and that ones that couldn't be answered, those particular officers offered to take away and then answer after the fact. In relation to HR, I just want to make one thing absolutely clear, and that is there is going to be no redundancies over this. All of the staff that are currently in the private patients ward are guaranteed to be reallocated a job within Noble's Hospital for the period of the closure.
This all comes into effect in January. When will staff find out where they're going?
I would hope that it will be as quickly as possible. I would see it as being a short time scale. I think one of the things I've stressed since this decision was made as minister is that we must have certainty for the staff. One of the reasons I've not been doing the press bit until today is I didn't want anyone learning of this from the media. We have a duty to the staff that they were the first point of call to hear about this, and that's exactly what we did. We consulted with the medical consultants on the 26th of September, and then the staff within the private patients unit itself were consulted with on Friday. So they've all been notified prior to this announcement going out, and from my point of view, that was absolutely crucial.
Can you give assurances to those staff that will be reallocated that they will be able to maintain similar hours that they've been currently on, because so many people have specific shift patterns to work around children, school runs, that sort of thing?
I would hope so. My personal view as Minister is that we should be trying to accommodate those people with the sort of shifts that they have now and looking to get them into roles. How easy that will be when we look at it practically, I don't know, but we should, wherever possible, be bending over backwards to make sure that those people can actually end up in jobs that are similar to what they're doing now.
You've also given the number £200,000 as the saving to the department that this closure and refurbishment will give. Will that not put more demand on the hospital elsewhere and therefore added cost?
Potentially in some areas, but this isn't about savings. That's the point. Although there is a saving during the closure, to me, it's not about saving money. If we were going to save money, we would suspend private patients' practice permanently, because the private patients' practice over here on the departmental figures actually costs us money. So we are probably one of the few private patient wings in the whole Western world that doesn't make a profit. Or certainly not on the figures I've seen anyway. So I think what's more important is that we focus on getting the private patient offering right. I am absolutely committed to there being private practice on this island, and if we are going to do it, we're going to do it right, and we're going to put those private patients at the front of everything we do.